The Let Kashmir Decide movement is bringing to you a brand new show on JKTV where you will get the latest updates and analysis into the situation in Indian-occupied Kashmir.
Modi and the Indian government want the world to believe that all is well in Indian-occupied Kashmir, but that is decidedly not the case. Join us and different guests every Thursday for insight into the latest developments in the Kashmiri freedom struggle.
Good evening. Welcome to Let Kashmir Decide. Tonight we're remembering the events of Kunan Poshpora that happened 31 years ago on the night, the 23rd of February 1991. My name's Claire Bidwell. I'm a primary school teacher and a human rights activist in Scotland. I'm going to be here tonight with Mary Scully, a political writer and human rights activist from the USA. And we've got amazing, knowledgeable guests with us tonight, long-time Kashmiri activists working for the cause. We have Zina Adam and Nida Salam with us. And so I'll be bringing in and introducing them. It was a very horrific night, a traumatic night. You know, the fact that 31 years on, there is still so much feeling for this, that there has been no justice for them, a gross miscarriage of justice, and an incident that remains imprinted in everybody's mind with the mass rape of villages, Kunan and Poshpora, where the military rounded up the men and then they went into the women's homes and attacked the women there, youngest being 13, eldest of 80 and some pregnant. And it touches a core and a heart with women everywhere, and obviously human beings that care about human rights everywhere. So we're going to be looking at insight to that today, what we can learn from that and how we can take it forward. So good evening to you, Mary. How are you this evening?
Good.
That's good. Nice to see you. So we're lucky tonight, aren't we? We watched the Kashmir Institute of International Relations, their amazing Zoom program yesterday, which can be found on their YouTube site, which had some wonderful guests, really good discussion. I couldn't, stop listening. It got way past my bedtime and I kept going and it just builds that passion, that desire to work together with other people and find a solution and get those justice for the women. So Mary, what are you hoping to learn from tonight and take forward in the activism and making connections with people and hopefully working towards solutions?
I think what happened and what is going on under occupation in Kashmir, and secondly, some insights into the whole question of mass rape as a weapon of war. I think that it's a very difficult issue. It's a gruesome one, and so it's often hard for people to talk about. But it must be discussed because millions of women around the world have been affected by that, notably Kashmiri women, but also women.
Absolutely. Yeah, and we'll maybe find out some more about that from our guests tonight, because what I understand of Muslim women is, have to express what's actually happened to them. It would be mortifying, would be humiliating. So it takes a lot of bravery to step through for those women to come up and stand for that, and perhaps important why we talk about that. So, and we'll bring onto the screen Nida Salam. Thank you, Nida, for joining us. Nida is a human rights activist and a barrister. She grew up in England, in the UK, and is currently in Pakistan. So thank you for joining us this evening.
Hello, Claire and Mary. Thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you.
You're very welcome. It's an honor to have you with us. Thank you. And then we'll bring in Zina Adam. Good evening, Zina. Thank you so much for joining us. It's lovely to see you here. Zina is a long-time human rights activist and from South Africa.
Hello, Claire and Mary. Very warm welcome. Well, looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you.
Yeah, me very much too. So, Mary, I'm going to hand over to you. And ladies, I will leave you in Mary's very capable hands as we learn a little bit more about you, the incident, and then together how you think, suggestions what's happening, what solution focused things are out there, and how can we support. So looking forward to the discussion. Okay, over to you, Mary. Thank you.
Zinat and Nita, we'd like to begin with you telling us about yourself, where you're from, and your development as a political activist and thinker. So, Zinat, do you want to begin with telling us something about yourself?
Sure. I grew up in apartheid South Africa before we attained our freedom. And I think that instilled in me a very strong sense of human rights and justice. And that has also been added to from my faith, Islam, where the root of understanding humanity is through truth and justice. I also had stalwart support and very strong inspiration from a mother who was an activist. I've been working as a diplomat and as an independent international relations strategist, and I work mainly in the Middle East and in Africa, but also in parts of Asia. So Afghanistan, Kashmir are very important aspects that I focus on.
Thank you. Nita, would you tell us about yourself?
Mary, my academic and professional background is law, and I'm from Pakistan, part of Kashmir. I studied from United Kingdom. So besides that, I write for multifarious newspapers on human rights violations across the globe, Pakistan's role in relation to Afghanistan, and a standing of Pakistan in the region. Besides that, I'm quite passionate in relation to human rights and Kashmir issue. So I'm an activist in relation to it.
Thank you very much. We find that our guests often have extremely interesting political backgrounds. Zinat, could we begin with you describing what happened on the night of February 23rd, 1991 at Kunan Poshpora? What actually happened?
Mary, from our understanding of the reports that we got from the survivors of the atrocity that took place on the 23rd of February 1991, is that it was a very cold, bitterly cold night. It had snowed quite heavily, and numerous soldiers entered into the villages of Kunan and Poshpora, rounded up the men and boys, took them outside, made them strip down, stand almost naked in the deep snow. They were tortured, they were brutalized, but no one at that time had known what was happening in the homes of the women and children until the next morning when the men were released. And when they returned to their homes, what they found were the brutalized bodies of their wives, sisters, mothers, who had been raped, gang raped, who had been tortured, and who were found with their clothes torn, lying in pools of blood. This is not an easy thing for any human being to come home to and to witness, but even worse for those men of Kunan and Poshpora who themselves were violated and tortured out in the snow. Almost immediately, there was an attempt by the villagers to try and get testimony and to try and get justice. But until today, that hasn't been achieved.
Thank you. Nita, would you like to add to that about what it is that happened that night?
Thousands of Kashmiri women have been battling for the past many decades with no end to the scary injustice. They cry out in suffocating pain and wait for the day when they will be given justice for the trauma they endured. Women bodies have been battlegrounds since ever. Conflict engulfed the Kashmir Valley. They have been robbed of their lives, their peace, and dignity. Yet there is no systematic approach to solve pending rape cases. History of rape as a weapon of war and counterinsurgency tactics dates back to the origin of conflict and was intended to satisfy unjustifiable revenge to subordinate the local population and to instill fear in them. Very importantly, rape was employed as method of collective punishment against those who spoke of their rights and led a public outcry. Rape is recognized under international law as a human right violation and a manifestation of gender-based violence against women, and that could amount to torture. According to Article 27, second paragraph of the 1949 Geneva Convention 4, very explicitly states that women shall be especially protected against any attack on their honor, in particular against rape. India as a state failed to protect the human rights, and I strongly believe that India as a state is in a breach. So India is in a breach of international law, international agreement, and commitments. The world's largest democracy, India, had not made any public prosecution or punishment of Indian military, Indian security forces, of any rape case of Kunan and Poshpora so far. The International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights prohibit torture and other forms of cruel, inhuman, degrading treatments. The government of India has ratified the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. I strongly believe that they still couldn't protect the human rights of the people. India has also ratified the Fourth Geneva Convention of 1949. Article 3 of the Geneva Convention prohibits torture and ill treatment. Rape is clearly prohibited according to Article 3, and India is in a breach. India's own criminal law makes torture a crime and clearly states that prescribes punishment for members of the police or other security forces who have committed rape. Under Section 376(1) of the Indian Penal Code, minimum term of 7-year imprisonment may be imposed for rape. And I would like to mention here that India as a state failed to protect human rights from all perspectives, and India is in a breach of international law, international commitment, obligations.
Thank you very much. Could you discuss this whole question of the use of rape, of mass rape as a weapon of war? I understand you're quite knowledgeable about its use in the Congo, in the Democratic Republic Congo, against Mayan women, against Syrian women. If you could discuss that. Zina, do you want to begin with that whole question of the use of rape as a weapon of war, including against male prisoners, boys and men prisoners?
Certainly, Mary. If we look back at history, going hundreds of years back, rape has been weaponized as a weapon of war, most often in the violation of women's bodies, and women's bodies become the battleground. It is a systematic military strategy that is employed by most often settler colonial states or marauding hordes that come in. And really, that's what we witness in Kunan and Poshpora. When you look at a settler colonial system, it means that, as Nida had indicated, there is an attempt to subjugate and humiliate an entire population. That cannot happen in a vacuum, and it cannot happen without authorization. In the situation of Kunan and Poshpora, the armed forces were protected by the Special Powers Act. And so that meant that the Indian soldiers absolutely had carte blanche to do what they wanted, to cease and desist, to go into the villages on the pretext of trying to look for terrorists, but in fact violating human beings, including the men and the boys. We see that in a pattern around the world in most conflict regions. So we look at Rwanda, for instance, during the genocide. That was genocidal rape that was taking place. We look at the Congo, and one of the difficult things in the Congo is that it is being utilized to control the resources And so by humiliating and raping people, you're also displacing them from their villages and then bringing in the multinational corporations to be able to gain access to the mining corporations, to the mining resources. We've seen rape as a weapon of war in Syria since the revolution, and most brutally, what has been happening is rape in detention. And although we don't get succinct reports coming out of Kashmir, we know that there are so many disappeared people, young men who simply are taken away. And it is almost certain that in their detention and in their disappearances, they are being violated as well. This is a means of annihilation, of humiliation, of ethnic cleansing, to destroy entire communities. And it goes on for generations, because if one generation had been humiliated, it continues into the rest of the generations. And when we look at Muslim women in particular who have been violated, it is such a difficult stigma because they carry that with them. And in Kunan Poshpora, what was heartbreaking, as Claire had indicated, the youngest victim was about 13 years old. The eldest was 80. How do you violate a person who is likely to be your grandmother? Most of those survivors have passed on now, but their legacy is still there, and it's a memory in the people of Kashmir, and they cannot ever forget that. But what those who had survived had done over the years is to try and get justice, continuously reporting and reminding the court systems that this is what had taken place, wanting the Human Rights Commission to take action and to give them their dignity back. But that didn't happen because there are systematic approaches to try and frustrate the survivors, to ensure that justice is not meted out, to try and even hush them up. And I think that this is really the strategy of the settler colonial state that occupies Kashmir, with between 700,000 to 900,000 soldiers. Many Indian soldiers are also being deployed in places like the DRC. And so if that psyche is something that they have been taught and they have been trained in, they're going to perpetrate it anywhere else in the world, whether they are blue-hatted or not.
Yes, thank you very much. It's quite gruesome. Nita, do you want to address that question?
I strongly agree with Zenas from all perspectives, because rape has been leveraged as a weapon of war by Indian security forces comprising Indian Army, Central Reserve Police Force, and border security personnel. It's not that just that we are saying that in our perspective. Even international reports clearly stated that. For instance, in 1993, Human Rights Watch report stated that Indian military has increased in frequency in relation to the rape over the years, as compared to the rape victims of rest of the world, as compared to occupied Kashmir. Actually, Indian military have used rape as a counterinsurgency tactics. Even scholar Inger Skashebag states that the pattern of rape in Kashmir is that when soldiers enter civilian residences, they kill or evict the men before raping the women. A scholar Subhan Mathur, he calls rape as an essential element of the Indian military strategy in Kashmir. Very importantly, at the 52 United Nations Commission on Human Rights, and Professor William Barker gave testimony that rape in Kashmir was not merely a case of isolated incident involving undisciplined Indian soldiers. Actually, rather than security forces were actively deploying rape on the Kashmir populace as a method of humiliation and frightening. Another study in 2005 by Madison Sans Frontier concluded that the rate of sexual violence against Kashmiri women are quite higher in terms of percentage as compared to anywhere across the globe. So these are the statistics. These are the real facts and the figures and the realistic doctrines, which I strongly believe that Western allies Western communities should be aware and should consider in relation to protect human rights of the women of occupied Kashmir.
Thank you
Mary,
very much.
I'd like to come in and support what Nida is saying. And for me, the Médecins Sans Frontières report was from 1989. So if in 1989 they had already identified that rape was being used systematically by the Indian forces to subjugate Kashmiri women, I think that the situation has only worsened since then. At that stage, as Nida had indicated, Médecins Sans Frontières had determined from their reports that Kashmiri women were the worst sufferers of sexual violence in the world. This is not small statistics, and these are not organizations that can be ignored when we talk about organizations like Human Rights Watch. But what is it that the world has done when it comes to dealing with these sexual violences that have been taking place in the name of war? And how do women get some justice? So we know that the ICC and the Rome Statute indicated in 1998 that acts of sexual violence, including rape, are to be constituted as a war crime. So these can be prosecuted at the level of the ICC. Of course, the difficulty, and as we had spoken about, for example, amongst Rohingya, for example, amongst the women in Kashmir, it is very difficult to get the testimony. And this is what was the excuse that the Indian government and the Indian justice system had used in the case of Kunan Poshpora, was to say that the stories keep changing and the numbers of women who have come forward keep changing. Initially it's 23, later on it's 45, later on it's 50. But the reasons behind that and where we need to show our empathy and our compassion is that this is an extremely difficult thing for women to talk about, to come forward and say, I was violated. And the reason why it's so difficult is also because of the social stigma that comes along with that. But in addition to that, these women were subjected to medical examinations. They were then accused of having extramarital affairs, despite the fact that there was evidence of rape on their bodies, despite the fact that many women had to have hysterectomies, lost their uteruses and their ovaries as a result of the trauma on their bodies, the fact that they were contained in Kunan and Poshpora because no other men would marry them. And the fact that year after year, they relived this trauma until their death. Those who have passed on and those who remain alive are still living through it and still calling for justice. And this is the reason why we cannot forget about an incident like Kunan and Poshpora, and knowing that this kind of systematic rape as a weapon of war is still being used in Kashmir today. And in fact, under the abrogation of Article 370, it's actually gotten worse.
Clara, I would like to add to Zeena's perspective. The reason why the prosecutions are not into practice in India under the current government or the past governments, because the Indian military is involved, and that is a breach of the code of the military conduct. Claire, I am from Pakistan, part of Kashmir. Honestly speaking, I have never ever seen Pakistani military oppressing people. We have our Supreme Court. We have a separate state. We have a prime minister. We have a president. So, like, as a Pakistani proud Kashmiri, we are having all the fundamental basic human rights, and all military is at borders to protect people, not to oppress, not to knock their doors and suppress them. But as a child, as a Pakistani proud Kashmiri, I have witnessed Indian military shelling at our lands, houses, villages. Imagine, as a woman, you're living alone, you don't have any male member, and military with the weapons patrolling your street, knocking your doors, suppressing you, humiliating you, torturing you. So according to the Universal Declarations of Human Rights, these are all breach of international commitments, breach of human rights, and breach. India failed to protect human rights from all perspective, and the current government under the RSS fascist ideology, Modi and his cabinet. Look at the current situation in India for Muslims at the moment. I'm afraid for the Muslim women. The recent incident where a Muslim woman exercised her right to practice her religion, a right to live with dignity, whatever she wanted to wear, and how the people with the RSS ideology suppress her, and that video got viral across the globe and was condemned. But unfortunately, Indian government and the current prime minister's cabinet, not even a single person condemned that act. Even the human rights minister actually failed to condemn that. So yeah, and it is quite disturbing.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite heart touching because, I mean, for me, when I first came, this is all new to me over the last 2 years. It's the only time I'm learning this. This has been hidden from Western society, mainstream society, where you're indoctrinated into your societies. And obviously, India being that powerful economy, it's been hidden. And my heart went out to one person at the time that could not contact his family. Didn't know how his mum was, didn't know how his dad was, or his sister. And that's nothing on the scale about what we're talking about right now. And it's horrific that this is not known of, and that even the more that are coming to know. I mean, I feel like we're watching at the moment with the way Muslim women are being treated in India. It's almost like a train that's running away, and we can't stop it. And we're trying our best, everybody with their different skills and what we can. How you've lived with this your whole life and that feeling, I have got no idea. One of the stories I read, and you can maybe...
You know what? As a woman, my question today from you as women, actually, why double standard when it comes to human rights? Because like as a human rights lawyer, human rights defender, my question here is that what I have researched, learned and taught in the universities, in the colleges and all that, human rights is universal to all. Then why double standard? Why human rights are different for the Western world as compared to the Eastern, underdeveloped, and the developing world? When it states that it's universal to all, no matter who you are, no matter what your religion is, no matter what your background is, what your caste and creed is, then why double standard from the Western world?
Well, it has to come down to money, doesn't it? And economics. The United Nations is there. If it was functioning as it was meant to be, our world would be completely different. It's the power, our governments, for me, but from what I can see, the power economies, the way they are dialoguing and how important the finance, and it's just being put over human rights. That's the only way I can see it. And so, I know for me, it's this thing about the power of the people. Look at the passion.
Today, in relation to Kashmir and human rights, today Russia attacked on Ukraine. Again, I'm worried for the innocent children and weak women there. And what about their human rights, a right to have a life when there are airstrikes and all that. So, it's quite disturbing as a young woman when I come across these questions.
Because they're not having any of their rights met at all. And I think I was going to say, just to link back to one of the stories, I think, was there a lady that was holding a 2-year-old child, and it ended up in the scuffle with the Indian military that the baby was dropped. I don't know if it was dropped out the window and has been paralyzed for the rest of its life on the back of that. So, I don't know. There's sometimes a feeling of helplessness, isn't there? Because what have we got to do? What has any of us as women, of human beings, what have we actually got to do to be heard? What have we got to do to stop this? I mean, Mary, do you want to come in and perhaps
Yes.
comment and thoughts and answer those, and bring Zinat in as well?
No, I would like Zinat and Nida to address the role that Kashmiri feminists, who are now silenced, of course, what role that they have played, not only in commemorating Kunan Poshpora, but in educating about the whole issue of mass rape as a weapon of war, and about how we approach, how we address those who are the victims of this. You both already addressed it, but if you could elaborate more about that, about the role that Kashmiri feminists have played in this whole issue. Very important role. Not just for Kashmiri women, but for women, as Zina pointed out, in the Congo and Rwanda, and Mayan women. Could you address that? Do you want to begin, Zina, and then?
Sure, Mary. I think that, women's voices in Kashmiri women have been very vocal, but their voices are not reaching beyond Kashmir very easily. We don't seem to get them onto international platforms to be able to hear firsthand from Kashmiri women as to what they think, how they would like to have their lives and their justice meted. And this is very important. There are very strong women in Kashmir, women who are journalists, women who have established organizations. For example, we witnessed some of the women standing and calling for justice when it comes to the half-widow issue. And that is also a very serious and very unique circumstance for women in Kashmir, where their husbands have been abducted and haven't been found for years, and they are considered half-widows. So they're neither married nor widowed completely. And they have taken to the streets to call for the return of their husbands, or to at least be told what has happened to these men. It is an absolutely unbearable circumstance. On top of that, they've had the siege. On top of that, they've had the abrogation of their special status. And when that abrogation happened, Mary, one of the things that was really quite frightening was that the BJP ministers and Hindu nationalists came out with very misogynistic language towards the Kashmiri women. Yes. They have exoticized Kashmiri women as being fairer, more beautiful. And now that we have abrogated 370, you are able to go and marry these Kashmiris and bring them here, and you'll be able to have Kashmiri women. So it's really been a misogynistic means of identifying and sexualizing the Kashmiri women in that context. Another thing that has been really, really problematic since the siege and since the abrogation of 370 is that the State Human Rights Commission has been shut down. And when they were shut down, there were thousands of pending cases from decades ago that have not yet been heard, that have not been taken to the courts, and have not been elevated to the National Human Rights Commission for investigations. Many of these are related to rape in the Kashmiri territories. Many of these involve victims who are minors, who are under age. And this is frightening. And when I say many, I mean hundreds, if not thousands. And this is being buried because the State Human Rights Commission has been closed in Kashmir. And so all these cases are just being packed away and said, well, it didn't really happen. And so there will not be justice for the Kashmiri minors and the Kashmiri women who have had this genocidal rape perpetrated against them.
Thank you very much. It's very gruesome, but it's very helpful. Nida, do you want to address that also? Nida, are you still?
Hi, we seem to have currently not lost Nida, unfortunately. I'm hoping she'll make her way back in. So if she appears again, I'll put her up on the screen. So maybe you want to take the next question forward with Zinat. As soon as she appears, I'll put her back up.
Yes. Zinat, maybe you could talk about, you've talked about some of it, but about, because there has been no justice in the courts for these women or these men, could you talk about, the legal aspects of what happened? In terms of Indian law, in terms of international law. So what is there left for these women to redress the crimes that were committed against them?
Well, the tragedy of Kunan and Poshpora is that many of the women who were violated are no longer with us. And during the time that they were alive, they continuously tried every avenue that they possibly could have, in terms of getting commissioners to come through, in terms of their testimonies. It took 22 to 23 years before anyone even listened. And then by, I think it was 2013 or 2014, the cases were considered closed by the Indian courts, saying that there's no way that they're going to be listening to this again. I think at this stage that there are international mechanisms at our disposal to be able to hold those to account. It is a very difficult and frustrating process to be able to continuously try legal recourse, whether that is nationally or whether that is at an international level. But we have to also recognize that the United Nations has a resolution 1820 that is very specific, saying that women and girls are particularly targeted through the use of sexual violence, including as a tactic of war. We also know that there's 1325, which is supposed to protect, UN Security Council Resolution 1325, that is meant to protect women in conflict zones from that kind of sexual harassment and gender-based violence that is perpetrated against them. And then, as I mentioned earlier, that you do have the ICC that has recognized rape as a weapon of war. The difficulty is, how do we get those testimonies recognized and taken to a court like the ICC and hold the Indian government to account, when at the moment, nationally in Kashmir, and when it comes to the cases of gender-based violence as a weapon of war, there are less than 5% conviction rates in the Indian courts. And as I mentioned just a little while ago, that the Human Rights Commission have been closed. Our last statistic that we had was before the siege in 2019. 2019 alone, from January until March, there were 64 rape cases in Kashmir. Of those 64, 33 were children. That is in a space of 3 months before the actual siege took place. Since then, we haven't been able to get accurate statistics. So you can imagine the hundreds of children and women and men who are being violated, especially now under a nationalistic fascist government. And they are going to be perpetrating this elsewhere in India. As I mentioned in the panel discussion yesterday, we look at their activities in Assam, where they are trying to denationalize civilians in Assam because they are Muslim. We look at what Nida described in Karnataka with the hijab ban, and that is, it's inspiring other Hindu nationalists to act independently and attack women who are wearing hijab. We look at another area off the coast of Kerala, Lakshadweep, where there is a majority of Muslims on the island and they are being dispossessed. So this is a very, very strategic means that the Indian government is perpetrating, and they have trained their soldiers in order to subjugate all Muslims in the Indian territories. Kashmir has been their playground. And we have to also recognize, is a very important point, that they don't do so without support from the international community. Modi has been celebrated in Texas, in Johannesburg, in other parts of the world. And as Claire had mentioned, the economy is a very important aspect of this. But look at another fascist, racist, settler colonial state, and that is Israel, who is supporting and supplying India with weapons that are being used in Kashmir, supplying them with surveillance capitalist technology that is being used against the Kashmiri population, and they are mirroring what is happening in Palestine and occupied territories in Kashmir.
Yes, thank you very much. Nita, did you hear the question that I asked? It's about the legal prospects for these women seeking redress, because there's been no justice so far. What kind of legal paths are there for Kashmiris to seek redress for these crimes against women, girls, and also males. Do you know what I mean?
All right. As for I will agree whatever Zenith has recently spoke about. As far as international commitment as a state is concerned, India is bound under international law to protect human rights and to make sure that people should get justice. And the national courts of India, according to the constitution, do have the aspect of human rights protection. But to get justice in the third world countries, in developing countries, is not as in the first world countries. It's quite different. The system, the court system, and the capitalism, which Zina has recently explained very beautifully. So to get justice is quite tough in Eastern world, especially in South Asia.
Yes.
And when it comes to rape cases and commemorate Kunan and Poshpora as a woman, I think it helped me realize how strong must be how stories must be heard with all the complexities of society ravaged and splintered by militarization and of the huge challenges and difficulties in documenting and asking for justice. In today's milieu, the challenges have been highlighted. Civil society is now under threat. An attack. Human rights are not given, but a subject actually up for debate across the globe. It is perhaps time to proclaim what human rights are all about and reiterate the globally accepted norms of how governments must behave towards all persons under their jurisdiction, and let the law and justice to prevail. For how long, as a state, you will suppress, oppress, and use weapons? There will be end.
Thank you very much. Zina, do you have anything to add to that?
I think that as we wrap up this discussion, Mary, what we need to recognize is that Kashmir is still heavily occupied and has one of the largest number of Indian troops, soldiers, in terms of proportion to the number of people, civilians in Kashmir. The narrative that the Indian government is putting forward is that this is necessary in fighting terrorism. But I think we're reaching a stage where the rest of the world is questioning this narrative of terrorism being a very easy excuse to continue to violate people's human rights. I think that we need to also bear witness that society has really become very impervious to the acts of violence. There is a sense of numbness. People don't want to talk about these difficult topics. They don't want to hear about it, and they don't want to acknowledge that this happens in our world. But we, the women on this panel, need to continue that fight to be able to raise those voices for those women who cannot, those who are under siege, those who are not having their voices heard. It's our duty to make sure that it is heard. It's our duty to tell the stories of Kunan Poshpora even 31 years later, because if we don't, it means that we have lost our humanity and that we have lost the fight to these fascists. And I think as a last note is that to recognize that we are facing a global epidemic of rape as a weapon of war.
Yes.
Whether it is in Kashmir or whether it is in Syria, whether we are going to be seeing it in Ukraine, whether it is Africa, it is a pandemic, and it's a worse pandemic than we have faced from COVID in the last 2 years. And I fight that as strongly as possible. I really thank you for having me on this panel.
Lastly, could you elaborate a little more, both of you, on what you think we can do as human rights activists, as women's rights activists, what we can do to make sure to continually commemorate events like Kunan Poshpora, especially now that the voices of Kashmiri women and feminists have been silenced. What do you think we can do? Do you want to begin, Nita? What do you think activists should do?
We should spread an awareness. We should spread the actual realistic facts and figures to the young generation. And as far as sexual violence is concerned, the problem in the context of sexual violence is getting that these cases registered in the court is not easy. It's not easy anywhere in the South Asian context because of the manner in which the honor of women is construed in communities. People feel that these women have been dishonored, and therefore talking about it more and more is further dishonoring them. Besides the violation which has happened, you have to fight that mindset as well. And we should lift other women in society. We should encourage them to come forward, speak up for your rights, and do fight for your rights. As far as recommendations are concerned, I strongly believe that government of India should support a swift investigation of rape cases conducted by the military forces. They should be prosecuted in civil courts. Those found guilty should be punished regardless of their military ranks. Medical workers should have examined and treated those who treated rape victims should be protected from abuse from powerful people. And at last, I would like to say that I utterly condemn the strategy of rape by Indian military against Kashmiri women. A victim experienced drastic physical, emotional consequences. Military courts of India in general were proved to be incompetent to deal with the cases of serious human rights violations. Kashmiri women in Indian occupied faced infinite injustice, and Kashmiri women are the biggest victims of inhuman siege across the globe. So India as a state failed to investigate, to prosecute, and failed to provide reparation to the victims, and is in a breach. So we should tell the young generation and the world, especially the Western community, the realistic facts and figures based on reality rather than fabricated stories.
Thank you very much. Zena,
Mary,
do you want to address it?
yes, I think that it is important to support what Nida has said. But I think that we also need to apply pressure on our own governments to recognize that India is a fascist state, to boycott India in the same manner as which we call for the boycott of the Zionist state. In terms of boycott, divestment, and sanctions. And this is where we have a very, very difficult task ahead of us, because we tried to do that here in South Africa, and we have quite a big Indian diaspora community, who many of which are involved in business and in the economy. And so when Modi came here on 2 visits, 2 occasions, so many of them would not support the kind of boycott or protest that we had. But what we tried to do on his last visit, which was in 2018, when he came on a state visit and as a member of the heads of state of a BRICS nation, to which South Africa is also party to, we try to bring an application to our National Prosecuting Authority in South Africa to conduct an investigation into human rights violations by the Indian state and by Prime Minister Modi in terms of the Rome Statute and the ICC. And this may not have reached the stage that we wanted to, but we certainly caused sufficient ructions prior to his arrival in South Africa, in the sense that the South African government were scurrying off to Delhi to try and allay his fears of arrest in South Africa, because not long before that, there was a call for an arrest of the president of Sudan at the time. So we certainly managed to get that kind of pressure. He was afraid of coming to South Africa, and we want to keep that kind of pressure on a fascist government like this. What we've done in the cases of Palestine and in terms of the settler colonial Zionist state there is that we've identified South Africans who have worked and who have served in the IDF and have perpetrated violations against the people of Gaza. If we can mirror something like that in the case of India and in the case of Kashmir, where we get testimony of who these soldiers are, and we get their names and we identify their badge numbers and we try and hold them to account on an international court, that's where we should be putting our energy. And if we can collectively start working with that, and with people like Nida who have the legal background, I think that we really would be able to get some recourse for women in Kashmir.
Thank you.
Mary, in addition to
I'm sorry, Nida.
in addition to Zenith, in relation to boycotting India as a state, as a country, I would like to mention here that Pakistan current government and the Prime Minister Imran Khan already boycotted bilateral trade with India because Imran Khan really wanted, as a Prime Minister, them to come forward on a table talk and resolve our issues, actually. But the question here, as Zenith said, that we wish they should be prosecuted in International Court of Justice and all. The question here is that the realistic and truthful question: will India be able to give the names of their military personnel? Is India ready for that? So that is the question. The governments and when they have already extreme fascist RSS ideology in practice, that will not only impact the people living in occupied Kashmir, but that's going to impact people from Delhi to Mumbai to Punjab, because I strongly believe that can disintegrate India from different perspectives, because India has many turmoils on her soil at the moment, problems with China in relation to Ladakh, problems with Iran, problems with Pakistan, and how India ran away already from Afghanistan. So the standing in the region for India at the moment is a very pivotal question.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Is there anything, those are my questions, and you were fabulously informative. Is there anything either of you wants to add to the discussion that you want to particularly address? Zina?
For me, Mary, thank you. I think that we've covered quite a lot in our discussion tonight, and I hope that we're able to take this forward in the future. Thank you so much to both you and Claire for arranging this, and thank you, Nida, for being on the panel with me.
Yes, Nida, do you want to add anything?
Thank you, Mary, for the invitation, and Claire for coordination. And it was wonderful hearing Zenith's perspectives, and happy to be part of the panel.
Thank you.
No, that's fantastic. Yeah, no, Mary, great questions and great answers, and really insightful. I think for me to wind it up and wrap it up, I feel, we've got 4 of us in different places around the world here, South Africa, Pakistan, Scotland, USA, and we're aware the barriers are the same wherever we go, even with the knowledge or the skills. So what I'm experiencing today in my locality is people talking about Ukraine. And the basic narrative is going along the lines of, oh no, have you seen about Ukraine? What are Russia doing, interfering in with Ukraine? Because that's what's being put out in our media. And that is where, it's like Zinat said, that's my opportunity to say, well, hang on a minute, because it's this double standards again. They're talking about Ukraine, but there's no mention of Kashmir or India. So all I can do, it's the one voice. And I think, again, thank you so much, because for our role, it's just trying to, with the likes of boycotts, we need more people to put the pressure on our governments, as you've said. So in our drive, it's like our event every 5th of every month, where we invite people to have tea with Kashmir under the hashtag Solidarity for Kashmir, and upload their tea or a photo of themselves to essentially get that name Kashmir out there, because we need more people to hear this, because that's what I think, for me, where I sit, my perspective is missing. All this work is going on, and we need, we're so well poised now. If it appeared in the UK media, this story came out, I know that people would rise for Kashmir. I know that they would stand for the women. This Kunan Poshpora, it would shock everybody. I just believe that they don't know. And it's like in Scotland, so we'll be looking at grassroots effort, keeping connecting with people like yourselves that have the knowledge or experience, because lots of us have got the passion, but we don't know where to put it. So it's great. So really, thank you, Mary. Thank you, Nida, and thank you, Zinat, for tonight. And let's all stay in touch and keep coordinating and letting one another know what we feel we can do.
I hope we can have both of you back again and again and again, because I really learned a tremendous amount from both of you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Blythe. Thank you.
Thank you.
So thank you so much. I hope to see you again soon. Take care. Good night.
Good
Good
night.
night.